In this video, I want to talk about the all-pass filter module inside of Bitwig Studio 5.2. And it doesn't look like much, but this module actually is very powerful. And it's called filter, but it's actually not filtering frequency content. It only shifts or flips or inverts the phase at this frequency. That's all it does. It doesn't, lower frequencies or push frequencies or anything like that. It only affects the phase at this center frequency. And I have this here inside of an FX grid. And before the FX grid, I have an EQ curve analyzer here sending out some kind of test signal. And after the FX grid, I'm using here also an EQ curve analyzer. And you can see here in green the frequencies. So you can see there's no filtering applied to the frequencies, but in purple you can see here the phase. So the phase basically shifts at this frequency here completely to the opposite. So everything that's positive goes negative and vice versa. And when we change the center frequency, you can see we shift basically here the phase at different frequencies. So this is all it does basically. So no frequency content is altered with this. So that's important to know. If we increase or decrease here the steepness of the filter, you can see it affects kind of how the phase shifts at certain points. So here we have now multiple phase shifts at higher frequencies and only one frequency shift here at the lower frequency, but you can also shift this here around. So at 2p, you basically do only one flip at this kind of center frequency. And if you pull this down here, the effect is not that drastic. You can go down to 20 Hertz, but the shift only is applied here barely above 1K. So this is kind of roughly how this works. Only to explain to you what's happening inside of this module. So here I have a polygrid. In there I have basically a sine oscillator. And the sine oscillator sounds like this. It's just a bass. Right? And here with the all-pass filter device in there, we can basically offset the whole signal. So the red one is the dry signal coming out of the sine, and the blue one here is the shifted one from the all-pass filter. So you can use this sometimes, if you want to phase align certain sounds. So let's say you have a kick drum and you have a bass sound, right? And you want to align the tail of the kick drum with the bass sound and it doesn't fit very well. You can put this here maybe on the bass or on the kick drum itself and then use here the center frequency to offset the phase of the kick drum, right? And this is kind of then like a delay. But it's only on this frequency. So you apply only this shift on this frequency. If you change the frequency of the bass, right, if you go higher, then the frequency offset or the shift here is different. So that's the idea about it, right? Because the center frequency is down here, and if we play higher frequencies, of course, the shift is different than up there. So here we have multiple, I showed you, right? If you pull this here up to 3p, you have then multiple phase shifts at certain points. And I think 1p, it only shifts the lower part of the frequency spectrum. So here we have, let's say, lower frequencies. And then you can shift it a bit. And then if you go higher, kind of is already still a complete phase flip or phase inversion. So if you want to apply a small little sub-millisecond offset to your signal, then you can use the all-pass module here with 1p and then just slightly offset some bass frequencies or some mid-range frequencies and align it with different signals. So that's the most easy, the most simplest use case for this because it doesn't alter the frequency at all. What you also can do is you can phase modulate signals with this. So let's say you have some kind of sound, some kind of melody or a sample, and you want to phase modulate this or FM a signal with another signal. So you can do this because you do basically a phase shift, which is the same thing as using here the phase input on a sine, because the phase input also only just alters the position or the offset of the signal. So you can do this here with the all-pass device now on audio signals. So we can use here another oscillator. Let's use another sine oscillator here. You use a modulator out. You can't just go into here, right, and do this, a phase modulation with this, because we have here an oscillator. But let's imagine that you don't have an oscillator here with a phase modulation input. Let's say you have a sample or an audio track or some recording, right? And then you put an all-pass on that audio signal, and then you can use an oscillator here and then just modulate basically here with an audio rate. And then you get a different sound out of it. Let's pull up here the volume. So you can use the all-pass device or all-pass module to phase modulate or to frequency modulate all kinds of audio signals. You don't need oscillators for this now. You can use a sampler, you can use an audio signal, like I said, from a different channel. You just put an FX grid on this audio channel, and then you use a sine oscillator, and then you modulate this, and then you can phase modulate or FM any sound inside of Bitwig with this. I showed you this basically in some of my recent videos with the FM modulations where I used a delay. So now you don't need to use a delay. You can use an all-pass, which is much more precise with this, because I showed you, right? You have this sub-millisecond offset you can apply. You don't need to use milliseconds anymore. Okay, so that's that. Then we can also do some interesting frequency stuff with this. So if you maybe already know, most of the filters you get here, let's say a low pass filter here, is consisting of all pass filters in there, right? So you can build with some all pass modules a filter. So I try to do this here. You can see here the sine wave in the EQ, but we can also switch this here to, let's say, a saw. So we have some overtones, and we also want to change the resolution here. So yeah, we have a nice little saw there. So now we can just say we want to use a blend, and the blend actually just blends two sounds together, right? So we can use the all pass here, go in there, and then create an kind of a shifting signal. So we delay the signal here with the all pass, or we flip the phase at a certain point. It sounds like this. So here the thing is, we mix basically, let's go back here to the oscilloscope and that is the pitch. We mix basically here the original signal and a shifted signal together like this. And then you can see here, it basically kind of counters the original dry signal. So we have a phase cancellation. But because this has a center frequency, I showed you before that the offset is different at different frequencies, because we have here center frequency, right? We have a full phase flip at this frequency, but all the other frequencies have a different offset number or different offset value. So we shift at different frequency differently, which you can see here. Here is then basically no phase flip, and then we have here a lot of phase cancellations and so on. So we create basically some kind of low pass filter with this. And we can increase this effect by just using multiple of these here. So let's use here this. We go in here and that. Another one in there and then in here. Yeah, let's push this here together. Duplicate this. So now you can see we remove a lot of content here. And all we have to do now is more or less use a macro here and modulate here all the all-pass center frequencies. And you can bring in here all the overtones. So it sounds like this. So this is the whole magic of these all-pass filter devices. It changes or offsets the phase at different frequencies differently. So we can create phase cancellations in different frequencies with different amounts. So it creates basically filters. So here we have now a low-pass filter, a Jennifer low-pass filter. We can also create, let's say, let's use a blend here. And push this up. So this is a low-pass filter with multiple, with different of the same techniques here, and we increase basically with the more we add to this here, we increase the steepness of the filter. So we can also add here more if we want to. So the filter gets steeper the more you add. We can also create some kind of high-pass filter. It's the same technique basically, but I think you need to flip the phase here with the, or let's actually use this new module called invert. So this is now inversion, so it phase flips the signal again, but at all frequencies, not only at certain frequencies, at all frequencies. And we get with this here, yeah, some kind of high pass. You can see I remove now the lower frequencies, and we can do basically the same. We can duplicate this here. And we get steeper and steeper with every iteration in there. So now we have kind of a high pass with this. Maybe do one more here. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's okay. So high pass filter and low pass filter just with a few all pass devices here. We can also blend these two together. And then you can see we have here a certain kind of dip at the center frequency because we add the low pass and the high pass filter together, but they not really have unity gain at this crossover frequency. This is always a problem with also with frequency splitters and so on. So you have to balance this out and maybe change the offset frequencies differently. But what we also can do here is we can do exactly the opposite. So we can use another macro here and just say we want to offset here the all-pass frequency to this direction, right, up, or in the positive direction, and here in the negative direction. So we want to spread the frequencies apart on each of these things. So now if we increase here the frequency, right, so we offset this in one direction and we offset this one in another direction, we basically create some kind of notch filter with this. So what I want to say is you can now create your own kind of filters inside of the grid with a few all-pass modules here and get creative. So you can basically create high-pass filters, low-pass filters, combine these filters to create notch filters, and make different resonances at different frequencies. So you can create your own filters inside of the grid now with this. So it's pretty interesting actually. Oh yeah, I need to push this there. Yeah. And the more you add to this, the more steepness you get, and you can create, you know, more precise filters this way. So it's pretty interesting, pretty fun to do this. And as I showed you before, if you increase here the steepness of these all-pass filters, we create more phase inversions at upper frequencies. So if we do this here, let's go up to 6. You can see here we create some kind of comp filtering there. Let's see how this sounds. So yeah, it's basically a different kind of filter. It's more like a comp filter or notch filter with multiple notches, or it's kind of a flanger. I don't know, you can call it like you want to. So this is how you set up this stuff here inside of the grid. I think if you just use here, let's say, one blend, one all-pass device. Let's remove this here. One all-pass device, one blend. You kind of create some kind of, I would say, phaser maybe. Right, so you put an LFO on that, probably. So you can also create phasers with different, different notches, or you can experiment with filters and phasers and combine these two. But usually phasers and filters and all that stuff is more or less the same thing. It's just called differently because they sound different. This here on Hertz maybe. This is also possible. I found it also quite interesting to create some kind of resonating comp filters with this. So let's say you have a noise signal and a very short one. And then what you usually do is you go into a comp filter, which is also just a bunch of all-pass filters here with the feedback loop in there. Let's see how this sounds. So we increase the resonance. But with the comp filter, you have some kind of feedback here that you can change. Also here the feedback polarity, so you can flip the polarity or the phase on the feedback signal that goes back right into the input here. But you can't change the internals, like how the all-pass filters are set up and what kind of center frequencies they use and so on. So this was kind of missing. But now you can kind of do it with an all-pass here. So we can do something like, let's say, use a long delay. So it's the only way to do basically feedback inside of the grid. Use your long delay and go down with the delay time, and then we go back into a blend here, right? Mix these together, And then let's use here a gain knob, increase the gain a bit. But the problem here is this is not 0.02 milliseconds because this long delay is limited by the sample rate right here. So it's at minimum we can go down to 10.667 milliseconds. That's the buffer size, right? So even though we go lower, yeah, you can see it does change the signal. Only above 10, then it starts to change because that's the lowest amount here, 10 milliseconds. Right? So what we can do now is we can change here the buffer size. So we can go down to, let's say, 32 samples. So we have now here 0.67 milliseconds. So it's probably not a good sample size or buffer size of we can go lower than 10 milliseconds. So we can create kind of an comp filter with this here. But now, instead of using delays, we can also bring in, let's say, an all pass here at a certain point. So with this, we can, you have to be very careful here with this, with the feedback. You can create kind of nice bell sounds or some atonal sounds with different, you know, frequency, overtones, distributions. So I really hope we get in the future inside of the grid at some point a better feedback kind of device, because this feedback is really interesting or you can create a lot of interesting things with feedback. So maybe we get something to get down to lower buffer sizes at some point. Would be really nice to have. I know it's very nerdy for some people, but you can create a lot of nice devices with this. Can see here how we shift basically all the overtones around just because of this all-pass device. Yeah, so that's basically it for now. There's a lot of more stuff you can do with all-pass filters just by offsetting the phase at different frequency by different amounts. Like I said, yeah, feedback is interesting. Just combining dry signal and offset, all-pass offset signals gives you phaser sounds, flanger sounds. You can create filters, notch filters, low-pass filters, high-pass filters. It's probably also interesting for reverbs, distortion. So there's a lot of stuff you can create with all-pass filters. It's basically a component of most modern audio effects in any form. So it's a very nice addition to the Bitwig grid, but I wished we get lower values for the feedback buffer sizes. That, yeah, would be very nice to have in the future. Maybe the next update, I don't know. So that's the all-pass filter for you. I hope it gave you some interesting inspirations to try this out and create some of your own devices inside of the grid. That's it for me. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.